Well, welcome back to another episode of Exceptionally
Average
with Steve and Craig. We are your hosts, Craig
and Steve. And as we mentioned in another podcast previous, we are not just average. We are exceptionally average. We are that C+ student.
And as I said before, we are now tied with other exceptionally average podcasts. This is our third episode.
Amazing.
So we're kicking their butt, and we are going to be at number 4. Maybe I shouldn't speak before it happens, but we at least are just as average as the rest of them.
I think that puts us at like a 2.5 grade point average if we were in high school.
You know, people might laugh about the title, but it really, when we came up with it, it felt so perfect for us because you and I both have giant egos. We're both type A's that want to get things done. But at our heart, like, we both know we're not saying anything groundbreaking here.
Absolutely
like, we want
not.
to talk through these things and hopefully it encourages people. But, like, we hope it's exceptional. Like, we want to do this with excellence. But it's probably average. Like, it's exceptionally average.
Yes. And hopefully what we're saying is that we are, by saying that and doing this, it's relatable.
Yeah.
Right? We're not putting ourselves on a different level because we are just like whoever is listening right now in their car or doing their workout or getting ready in the morning, however they choose to listen.
And I think as we bring other people on the show and maybe interview some different people, where we'll go to is people where we have some weaknesses. Maybe we'll bring people on and talk with them, or we're going to at least talk through. And in today's one where, you know, we've talked a little bit pre-show, we're going to talk about spiritual health today. So we've done a 3-part series, a 3-part conversation on physical health, emotional health, and then spiritual health, kind of the 3 dimensions of life, at least for Christian folks: spiritual, emotional, physical, like our bodies.
I like to think of it as the 3-legged stool.
Yeah. And so we're going to have that. And we talked a little bit pre-show where we want to just be kind of honest with this. Mm-hmm. At least you shared some of that. So you'll get into that later. But I've often found that when talking about spiritual things, I always kind of want to know the backstory. And I don't know this for you, and I know you don't fully know it for me. How did you become a Christian? We meet as Christians, right? I'm your pastor. You show up at our church, and it's like, hi, I'm Steve. I'm Craig. We're already Christians. So we know where we're at now, and then we've had a relationship moving forward. But how does Steve come to know the Lord? Has it always been kind of a part? Because I don't think we can really talk about what it means to be spiritually healthy without knowing, at least even out of just sheer curiosity, where did it come from for you? What's your kind of journey to the Lord?
I appreciate that question. My parents started taking me to church, and kudos to them for doing so, when I was probably about 7 years old. And for them, they were engaging in the church for the first time as well.
Okay.
So what I would say, though, is for them, church became a social endeavor. It was a way for them to meet new people and find community, I think. Yeah. But it wasn't necessarily spiritually driven. It was community and friendship driven. And in seeking that, they accomplished that goal. But it did something different for me. It exposed me to the church. It exposed me to Jesus and who he was, and exposed me to the disciples, you know, as much as a 7-year-old can understand, right? Well, my parents divorced they separated when I was 14 years old and divorced when I was 15. And leading up to that, we probably made it to church for probably about a good 2.5 years running. And then the wheels started to come off for a number of reasons. And my parents ended up not really communicating, getting along, and it was tough. So for me, growing up as an only child, I've mentioned before, I grew up in the country, so I was very isolated. I had to find a way to connect with somebody or something. And to their credit, they planted that seed of spirituality, of Christianity in me almost without even really knowing. And that stuck with me. And I always felt like I had this need for something more than what I was getting. And I could never really figure that out because I was young. I was a kid. It happened for me ultimately when I went on a spring break my freshman year in college. I went to visit a friend in Alabama, and we ended up in Florida and did some fun stuff. But he was a very devout Christian, and he had moved away. I hadn't seen him really since the 7th grade. It was over the Easter weekend, and I sat down with his family, and we started to have dinner, and I went to grab the rolls. And his father, I remember his name's Bob, he very subtly said, "We'll go ahead and we'll pray first." Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I had prayed before with other people, but for some reason, this really struck me. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to listen to this. He prayed, and there was just something about that moment, capturing that moment and experiencing that prayer and that family unity around the table that I didn't have. And I connected with it. It was emotional for me. It was, man, that was cool. I want what they have.
Mm-hmm.
That weekend, we went to Easter service,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just weighing on me. And it was just like, I was just enjoying the moment, like taking it all in, this experience of being around people who were grateful,
Mm-hmm.
who were
so all in on their faith.
all in on their faith.
Yeah, so it wasn't a social thing. It
No,
was,
it wasn't.
yeah,
It was really about the
following Jesus,
devotion.
yeah.
Yeah. And it just felt right to me. And at the time I was in college, and you're 18 years old and you're trying to experience things, and there's parties and things
Mm-hmm.
like that you're taking part in. But for some reason, those never connected with me. But this did, and I wanted more of it. It was like I wanted what they had, and so it was interesting. There was a call to Jesus, and like an altar call, if you will, sitting in your seat. And the pastor said, "Would you please look up if you feel like you need saving right now?" And it's a little bit emotional for me to even share it, because I looked up and like, here I am.
Mm-hmm.
This is me, and I've got nothing to offer, but I've got everything to gain through whatever it is you're about to share with me. And that was my moment. And I came back home, and I just felt a connection on a deeper level. Like I didn't need to find and seek those friends, quote unquote friends, that were doing maybe questionable things, or maybe they're out drinking and doing things that, originally I wanted to be doing, or I thought I wanted to be doing. I just wanted to find more of what I just experienced down in Alabama. And so that was the beginning of my faith journey. And it carried me into and towards my marriage. And then when Jill and I, especially had Allison, our daughter, our firstborn, it became even more important for me to dial into that church and be that father figure from a spiritual standpoint. Because if there's one thing that a true Christian father wants for his kids, it's not necessarily, hey, you need you to be wildly successful in your career. You want for them to be saved.
Yeah.
You want to secure their eternal future. And that was important to me. And that was my faith journey. And it continues to grow. It continues to evolve. And my kids are strong in their faith. My wife is strong in her faith. I mean, oftentimes she's got her earbuds in, and I'm like, I'm trying to talk to her where she's not hearing me. Like, what are you doing? Listening to a sermon. Oh, cool. Let's listen to it together. And so it's very rewarding, very special. And we pray together as a family. And I want to say something, though, that's important. And I want to throw a question to you. I don't want anybody to think that that I open up my Bible in all of my free time and I'm reading scriptures and I'm highlighting passages and verses and quoting the Bible, because unfortunately I don't do that, and I need to do more of that. So when I'm talking about a guy who, when he's home, if he has a Bible sitting over here and my cell phone sitting on the other side, there's a very high chance that I'm probably going to pick up my cell phone and start scrolling through social media or something like that. And it's more of like a weekend warrior with my Bible, and I'll look things up and use it as a reference. But if I don't want people to think that I'm here touting and saying that I do things better than others, because I really don't. It was a unique journey. It continues to be a unique journey for me, and something I hope to keep improving upon.
So maybe in terms of spiritual health, if we're gonna, because I'm thinking that they've listened to maybe our physical health one. Maybe you're feeling a little flabby at this point. Maybe a little spiritually winded, that you could run. If you needed to, you could run, but you're probably not running maybe some 5Ks or marathons.
I'm skinny fat.
There you go. Yeah.
That's what I am.
Yeah.
That's what I am.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So, that's me. And, I find my inspiration through Christ and through relationships with people like you who are really strong in their faith. And obviously you're a pastor. And so I look to you as a mentor in that leadership role. And you provide that to me. You came to me for a physical aspect, a physical journey. I look to you for that spiritual health and that spiritual leadership and guidance. And so tell me about your pathway, because yours isn't a traditional path to the pulpit.
No, people assume a lot for pastors of like, well, you were probably raised in this deeply devout home, and then you were homeschooled, and you were this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
I have wonderful parents that are Christians. They took us to church. The church I was raised in, it was the family's church. My grandpa went there, and it just didn't connect with me for whatever reason. I try not to blame the church, because looking back, I could have just been a punk kid. But they didn't have like a great youth program or anything that really was trying to intentionally come after. So we just kind of had Sunday morning, and my folks served. My mom was a Sunday school teacher. My dad did all sorts of things. I remember him being a treasurer for a real long time, a deacon, or counted the money and stuff like that, usher. So church was always important to our family. We went every Sunday. So I knew the stories, but I just wasn't compelled by them. And I kind of decided in middle school, either God wasn't real, or if he was, I didn't care. I didn't want anything to do with him. It was right around that time that we weren't Catholic, but it was around that time that the Catholic sex abuse scandals were coming out. It was the early 2000s, late 90s. And that really bothered me, as it should, right? But I as a kid, you're unable to see the forest through the trees.
Can't process it.
Yeah, all you see is if they say they know God and they're horrible predators and pedophiles, what are we doing? And so you throw the baby out with the bathwater as a kid. That's what you do. And so I kind of decided that, and I told my mom, I'm not going to go to church anymore. I was the youngest, so I kind of got away with that more. Where like I think if my sister would have pulled that, it just wouldn't have worked because she was the oldest. Like for my brother and sister still say that my parents never made me go to church camp. And my brother and sister had to go to church camp, and they hated it. It wasn't a good camp, apparently. And they're like, that's why he ended up as a pastor, because he didn't have to go to church camp. You wrecked it for us. But like my mom wanted me to keep going to church, but I still remember, I don't know if she remembers this, but she's like, well, if you don't go to church, I'm not doing your laundry anymore, because I like that, like it's the way I love you. And if you can't make it to church, if you can't, bring it in yourself to go to church, I'm not doing your laundry. So at 8th grade, I started doing my own laundry. I was like, fine. I'm stubborn. And so I'm like, no, I'm not. Well, I'll just do my own laundry. But I actually thank God that they didn't force me. By the time you're a freshman, sophomore in high school, like, yeah, you've got to be able to own it for yourself a little bit. And so they would still go to church, and I just wouldn't join. And that's kind of when my faith journey became my own, though. And I think it was actually really good they didn't force me, because I think that might have been more detrimental and sent me further down a road of like, I don't want this. But my junior year of high school, there was this group in our school called Young Life. It was like a parachurch ministers, basically a youth group that existed outside the church. This guy named Mike O'Shea came into the school, and I knew what Young Life was. And, you know, he called it a cult and, you know, that kind of thing. And I knew it was about Jesus and I had nothing to do with it. But this guy named Mike O'Shea was a leader in it. And he showed up and he's like, hey man, my name's Mike. And I'm like, and my first words to her were, I know who you are and I know what you're about. I don't believe in God and I hate organized religion. So you can just save it. That's my first words to this like pastor. Cause I'm a public school kid and they're like in, and some people like, I'm like, I didn't sign up for this. And I don't need your God thing. Like it's weird. It's a little cult and I don't want to be a part of it. Fast forward 2 years, I'm at camp accepting Christ with this guy. Like a lot happens in the meantime, but his response back was, well, my name's Mike. I do believe in Jesus. I also have some problems with organized religion. So it's good to meet you, man. So then Mike just kept pursuing me in a relationship and like in a friendship.
Did that immediately tear down the walls for you? Or
No. I thought it was goofy and weird and awkward, but my dad loved it. So again, Mike would show up at my house and he'd like call and I would ice him because I was a high school kid and I didn't want to spend time with him. But I did. Like I loved that he was pursuing me because like he was wanting a friendship with me and wanting to spend time with me, but also I'm like too cool for school. And so, but like he'd show up and my dad thought it was wonderful. Like the youth pastor was coming around. He'd be like, well, Craig's in his room, head on up. And I'm like, what are you doing here? I didn't want to spend time with you. He's like, yeah, I know, your dad let me in. And I'm like, well, what the heck? And I'm like, Dad, I didn't want to hang out with him. And he's like, he's a good guy. You learn, you know, you could use some God, you know, that kind of thing of like, you've rebelled from church. But then it was also kind of cool because Mike was in college and he was this college guy that wants to spend time with you. He's got a car and he's like, we lived in Toledo area and he's taking us down to Bowling Green, eat at Campus Poly Eyes and introducing us to breadsticks and that were from heaven. And like, it's just kind of cool. And then for my senior year, he goes, hey, every Friday morning, I'm having these guys over for a Bible study at my house at 6 a.m. before school. And I'm going to make you guys Mike McMuffins every morning and every Friday morning. Do you want to be a part of this group? And I'm like, I don't want to study the Bible, but I do want Mike McMuffins and I do want to be a part of something.
Right. And
so I just started going. And I wasn't a Christian, and they would all like study the Bible, and I would just sit quietly, or I'd throw out like my idea, but I wasn't a believer. I would have told you I wasn't a believer, but I started like going to these Bible studies. I started going to this group thing, and they had these summer camps. And so I went to this summer camp, and it's different than a church camp. It's like church camp on steroids. It's amazing. It's basically like heaven on earth. They literally try and create heaven on earth for these kids. And I heard the gospel for the first time, really compact, of like, you are broken. And I'm like, yep, I know that. I know I'm jacked up. Like, I know I'm messed up. I know I've got addictions and desires of a young man that, you know, whether that's women or alcohol or whatever, that like, I know that, like, so I never had an issue with like, you're a sinner. I'm like, sure I am. Right. Like, look at my life. Yep. And then they were like, yeah, but Jesus died for that. And I'm like, oh.
Was that your tipping point?
Yes. So I heard about the resurrection and I was like, he really rose from the dead. I believe that. And I heard about the cross. And I had always known about the cross, but I didn't understand, why did Jesus die? Like, why? And so they give this thing called the 20 minutes at Young Life, where they just give you time to go and pray and to think and process. And so Goshen, Virginia, 2005, I had just graduated high school. I'm there with like my best friends and at this camp with Mike O'Shea, who 2 years earlier I told him was a cult leader, and he had sucked me into this cult. It wasn't a cult, but and I accepted Christ looking up at the Milky Way in this gorgeous piece of property in the mountains of the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia. And my prayer for accepting Christ was, okay, I guess I'm in. I believe this stuff. So, all right, God, Jesus.
Now what?
I guess I'm in. And I hear all these people like crying all around me, and it's like this emotional. And they give you 20 minutes, and it took me 15 seconds. And I'm like, all right, I don't know why these people are crying. This should be good news. Like, and so I met with Mike that night, and he's like, so what'd you do? I'm like, I guess I'm in. And he's like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm a Christian now. And I'm going to follow Jesus, I guess. And he's like, it's amazing, man. I was like, yeah, I guess I'm all in. And from that moment, I don't have a backslide. Or I don't have this like 3-year gap, like where you said like, hey, I accepted Christ. And then what really got me serious was the birth of my daughter. Right. From that moment, I have started walking. and I have not stopped. And so from that moment when I was 18 to the time I'm 35, I have taken my faith incredibly seriously as the guiding post of my life. Time in scripture, time in prayer. That doesn't mean I was perfect. It doesn't mean I didn't sin. It doesn't mean I didn't struggle. But I went to college. I became a young life leader. So
let me ask you a question. I want to go back to something, because that tipping point, there was something in that moment that, even though it was very maybe non-emotional for you, there was something that you desired that you maybe felt you weren't getting. There was something that was missing. Am I right or wrong?
I became convinced of the resurrection.
Okay.
So it was again, listen to our thing on emotional health. I didn't have the feelings.
Okay.
I had the head knowledge. I believe Jesus came back from the dead.
So it was a logical process for you.
100%. And some people don't get that, where they're like, oh, you just had this feeling. I'm like, no, I became utterly convinced dead man came back alive. And if he really came back alive, then that means he's God, and that means his words matter. So if I'm convinced that he came back alive, well, and then he calls me to also live X, Y, and Z way, well, he's the one that can conquer death. So I'm in. The feelings came later of like longing for that. It was very much I see myself as broken. I see this, and I see the world as deeply broken. Mm-hmm. I see Jesus as murdered and lived this life and called people to a different way of life that's really attractive. And so maybe I felt that. And then I see the resurrection, and I finally understand Easter. I always went to Easter, and I finally understand it. And it's like, it was just a light bulb moment.
Do you think it's unusual that people like yourself find their Christian faith analytically?
I think it's how you're built. So I'm type A. I'm a thinker. I'm not a feeler. So I process things through the Myers-Briggs, the old think feeler. I don't know if you ever took a Myers-Briggs test. It's a personality test.
I did.
But there's either
I failed it.
Yeah. Thank God for Jill. But it was this I'm a thinker, so I process new information through thinking through it. I don't feel it. So my first thought is, how do I think about that? Like, what do I think about that, and what do I know about that to be true? Versus how does it make me feel? Mm-hmm. And so that's still probably true today. And so. Yeah, from that point, once I became convinced, well, then once you're convinced of something, the rest of your life. So I go to college 2 months after I accept Christ. Most people would expect, oh, that's when you have, you kind of go nuts, you join a frat, you do whatever. Nope. I showed up to college utterly convinced Jesus rose from the dead, and I started following him as such. So I started leading Young Life. I started being in youth ministry, trying to share Jesus with kids at Otsego High School, and made all my friend group were other people convinced that Jesus came back from the dead, and other spiritually healthy people. So then I just started reading my Bible, my freshman dorm room, Harshman Dunbar, room 101, baby, on the campus of the Bowling Green State University.
We'll talk about that in another podcast. It'll be an intervention.
So I knew nothing about the Bible, but Mike O'Shea took me to the Christian bookstore and was like, we're going to buy you a Bible that you can understand. They got me a green Life Application Bible, New Living Translation. And I would just take it and I would drop it. My roommate and I had a steamer trunk as our coffee table, and I would just drop it on the steamer trunk, and whatever it opened to, I would slam my finger down and I'd go, that's what I'm going to read. And I'd just start reading. That is not a good way, by the way, spiritual health, but I didn't know any other way.
Right. It was your introduction to it. And
I knew the Bible was important, or so they said, but I didn't understand it. So I would read some wild stuff, and I would jump into like a book 30 chapters in. You'd be like in, Isaiah 30, and you're like, whoa, none of this makes sense. And it's like, and then I would be like, I don't understand the Bible. And they'd be like, yeah, moron, stop reading 30 chapters in. Like, understand the book.
Like you're reading the end of the book.
Yes.
You're reading
and
the end
you've
of the
got
book
66
first.
books in here. And I'm like,
yeah.
Wait, red letters versus not old, new. Like, okay, this stuff has Jesus. So the best thing I started doing is I just started reading the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because I was just getting nowhere with dropping the book open. And I just started reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John over and over and over again. And I was studying the voice of Jesus and studying the way he treated people and the parables and the teachings and how he interacted. And I just kept having these moments of like, do Christians know this is in here? Why does the church look this way? Do they understand? This is insane. This is amazing. This is really, really cool stuff. Jesus walked on water. And it's like, well, I struggle to believe that. Well, if you believe he came back from the dead, walking on water is nothing.
Not a big deal.
He fed 5,000 people. Well, that's incredible. And Christians, because they've heard it their whole life in church, are just like, yeah, the feeding.
It almost becomes it's commonplace. Fairy tale, is what it is, because you hear those stories as a child, like, and you relate them to like some kind of a Disney story, a cartoon, if you will. So let me say this, and I want to throw this question to you again. There's those out there right now that are listening, and they're like, "Hey, great, Steve, great, Craig, good for you. You're on your path to Christianity and in your faith journey, and got your spot secured in heaven." But they might be still questioning, and how, and does Christ really love me? Am I really a part of that family? Am I good enough for this journey? Because, man, I know that I hear that he walked on water. I hear that he rose from the dead. And I got to tell you, Pastor Craig, that stuff just doesn't happen. That's like magic fairy tale stuff. If you don't believe that, then you believe something else. There's got to be something you buy into, and that is, maybe it's the Big Bang Theory or something. But you believe that we arrived from an atom.
Yeah, we all have some type of
an atom created from nothing, made something, which if you walk down that path, that is a science and religion all on its own.
Sure.
Because now you weigh it back and forth and you say, okay, do I believe that something came out of nothing? Or do I believe that there was this eternal God? And so when you put it in that perspective, it's not so hard to believe that there's been an eternal God that has been there all along. Am I right? I mean,
absolutely.
Do you run up against that?
Oh, yeah. And for people, what I always do right now, it's 2022. So what do people do? Well, I struggle with the church and LGBT issues, or I struggle with the church and politics and Donald Trump, or I struggle with the church and its view in women, or I struggle with the church and X. And I'm like, all legitimate conversations that we can have. We can talk. Human sexuality is a huge deal. Politics and huge deal. Can you believe the resurrection of Jesus? So I immediately beeline back to that. People often want to talk to a pastor, and I struggle with this. What about the old earth, young earth, creation, all this stuff? We should talk about that, and those are really important. Can you accept that Jesus was crucified for your sins in accordance with the scriptures, was buried, and on the third day rose in accordance with the scriptures, and then presented himself to Peter, to John, to the other disciples, and some 500 people? That's what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15. And this is the gospel, is what he says. Can you believe that? And if they go, yeah, I actually think I do, I'm like, then we can work out all the other stuff. And you will. And for the past, 18 years, 17 years, I've been working out the other stuff through seminary, through study, through all this stuff. But if they're like, I can't get around that, I'm like, well, that's going to be our sticking point.
So really, once you buy into that, it's you can be a Christian and still have lots of questions.
Amen. Yep. I still do.
And you should have questions, right? You should want to pursue answers to a whole bunch of things that are become new to you. Am I right?
So one of the things that I think is really spiritually healthy is just being honest with where you're at. Some people grew up in fundamentalist cultures that, like, if you had questions, you weren't saved. There are days as a pastor where I'm like, I don't know that I believe any of this, but I'm still convinced of the resurrection. So I'm in, but I've got to figure the rest of this out.
What have been some of your biggest struggles along the way, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah.
Where are your hang-ups?
I struggle all the time with some of the Old Testament stories.
Okay.
I struggle with historicity, making timelines make sense, kind of thing. I struggle with just sometimes, and this is a prayer regularly for me, God, make yourself more known. Come down, take over the TVs, speak clearly, audibly, right now, in this moment. I need you. Come sit next to me. I've had a prayer one time. I was really struggling. I'm like, I won't tell anyone. Just come sit next to me, or I'll tell everyone if you want me to. I need you to come sit next to me. Just appear. In my more sane moments, I'm like, yeah, you would not be able to handle that, bro. Like, take it, like, right. But like in that moment, I'm like, so I really struggle with that of like, I need to feel you more real and present right now. And on days I feel that. Heck, there's weeks or months you feel that way when you're in a spiritually unhealthy place of just like, you know what, I don't know what I believe or where I'm at. And so I share that because I think a lot of times people assume like, well, pastors have perfect faith. Maybe some do. I don't. But I still am convinced of the resurrection, and I'm still convinced the way of following Jesus, the Jesus life of picking up your cross and following him, that calls you to not health and wealth, not this BS gospel of like, Jesus wants you to be happy and all this. Jesus came and said, if you want to be my disciple, you will follow me, you will pick up your cross, and you will follow me. That is not, you're going to have a great bank account and you're going to have a great marriage. That's a bill of goods that's garbage because guess what? The cancer diagnosis comes.
That's the carry your cross. That's
my
the
gospel actually accounts for that, carrying your cross. How does God just wants you to be happy account for, then why did he give me cancer? Because Jesus never actually talked about your happiness. He was murdered. Right. He was not a great happiness dude. He was homeless. He literally says that. He says in the gospel, foxes have homes and birds have nests. I have no place to lay my head. You follow a dark-skinned homeless dude and you're like, well, why doesn't he want me to have granite countertops, Steve? How could he want it to be so hard? And it's like, because he actually said that life was found in denying yourself. And I've actually found that to be true. That the more I say, Craig, don't worry about what you want. Serve and love others and put them first, whether it's your wife, whether it's your kids, whether it's Steve and the Harrises. How can I move towards others and love them and care about them? And not about my position, not about my title, not about pay. Just show them Jesus the best I can is where I found the best life to be found. And I found more people flourish in that. And it's not easy. But man, it just works. And it's like the kind of community I want to have. You and I have a kind of friendship that most men would love to have because it's someone you can be really honest with and someone you can talk to and someone you can share hard things with.
And we are brutally honest with one another, aren't we?
But it's rooted in, and I love you, man.
Yeah.
You could come to me and say, hey, I'm really struggling. I'm not going to go, I can't believe that. And you could come to me and say, hey, I did this thing. I've had people as their pastor confess some gnarly, messed up stuff that they've done. And I remember one guy came to me and he confessed he was cheating on his wife. And we talked and we took a walk around a lake and he was in deep. I mean, adultery is as deep as it gets. Mm-hmm. And I was sharing with him how much I love him, how much I care about him, but how this is jacked up and this is big time. And his life was, his world was hanging in the balance. And I remember, and he might not remember this, but he was driving home and he goes, hey, I want to thank you for just not screaming at me or making me feel horrible. Like, thank you for like just being with me. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking at him and I said, I love you. I think you're an absolute moron. I think you're the dumbest human I know right now. And you might have thrown your whole life away. But I love you and I'm with you in the down. Like you chucked it away. I'm with you in it. And that kind of like living towards one another where he's like, I just blew up my life. And what everyone, the world says you should be yelled at, you should be hollered at, and you're a moron. How could you do this? And here's this guy who's supposed to be this holy man or whatever, who's just like, well, I'm with you. I think you're dumb. I think you need to repent. I think you need to get your family back. And by God's grace, he did, by the way. But like, that's where I found the real life to happen. And so for those that don't know Christ, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But for those that are in it, they're like, yeah, I get it. It's not easy.
Right. And that's a conscious decision. I think that love for Christ, that love for God, and pursuing your faith journey, it has to be intentional, doesn't it? It can't just, I mean, when you say you're in love, for instance, with your spouse, there's a transition of that love from the first time you meet them and you get married and it's all this very exciting. Yeah. She's pretty, I'm handsome, and we're in this together.
Then you start aging like milk.
Yes.
Smelly and chunky.
And then you're just relying, it becomes a transition of a deeper love and friendship and respect for one another. But it's also very intentional. And that same intentionality has to be true in our spirituality.
Yeah, you've been married 28 years. You guys go to the theater every month? So you take a date day. I know that you spend time together. You're intentional in conversations. All of that 28 years in.
I'll tell you what, one of the coolest things and most underrated thing that we do, and as far as our intentionality, is when one makes the decision to go into the bedroom and go to bed, we both go, because we do it together. And because I don't like sleeping by myself, when I'm on the road and I'm traveling into a hotel, it's like the worst sleep I ever get. And it's not because of the bed. They're pretty darn comfortable. I'll be honest. It's because I miss my wife. And I notice that when I find myself in angst, I find myself in discomfort or maybe even out of control, it's like, God, where are you? But when I really stop to think about it, Craig, it's, God, where am I?
Yeah, it's that. So
I'm the one that's missing here, not you. I've turned my back.
There's this mindset I have. It's a kind of an analogy I've used with like a cartoon where, think of like Tom and Jerry. And, Tom's running, and then he turns around and Jerry's still right there. Like, he can't seem to get away.
Right.
But in his mind, he's run like all across the state, and he puts in the cab, and, he flies across the country, and we see this cartoony figure, and then he turns around, he's right there. That's how I always pictured the Lord, of like, you think you're running, and in human mindset, well, I need to now run back. If I've ran 1.5 miles, when I'm on the bike trail, you better not be gassed halfway, because you got to come all the way back. Your car is in the parking lot halfway back. And so we in a human mindset are like, oh, I haven't prayed, I haven't read my Bible, I haven't been to church. I have to at least jump through all these hoops to get back to God. And that's just not true. One, because God is not a fickle human. He doesn't need you. And that like, oh, Steve, you've hurt my feelings, so grovel a little bit, maybe buy me flowers and, that kind of thing. Or like, take me out to supper, or let's go to a Bucks game and,
Right.
But when you say intentionality, that's where it's easy to be like, where are you, God? It's difficult to say, yeah, where are you, Steve?
Yeah, he's really right here. I just haven't paid attention.
And I had someone the other day say, I find it a lot easier when stuff is going really wrong in my life. I'm much more devoted. I was like, yeah, because you want your cosmic genie.
That's right.
Like, oh my gosh, Lord, my wife's going to leave me. I'm going to pray. Oh my gosh, I can't make ends meet. I need to pray. As a pastor, I've had couples that need help money-wise. Man, their attendance is really good on Sunday service when I know they need help.
Right.
And then their bills are paid. And they still come because they're a little grateful because the church maybe helped them. And then they kind of disappear. And then when it goes really bad again, they show back up because they need help and all this stuff. And my argument has always been, maybe you won't need help the next time if you actually stay consistent this time.
Good point.
Like, maybe if you actually followed God in the in-between, he could teach you something about not needing to go into the thing. So if your cancer diagnosis is in 6 months, what could God teach you right now while you're whistling Dixie and things are great? What could God teach you now so that when you get the diagnosis, you hit the ground running with him? And rather than, oh my gosh, how could God allow this to happen? You're like, well, I know God's at my side, and he's been preparing me for this.
And you've told this story, and I want to reference this because it's so powerful. You have told the story, and I remember the sermon tremendously. It rings vibrant in my head. Don't waste your cancer. I remember that very well. And for those who want to hear more about that, connect with us, and we'll hook you up with that sermon.
Yeah, I talk about how your pain is a commodity.
Yeah.
So commodity is something that's valuable. And we don't think about that. And again, Joel Osteen is not going to tell you that, and the TV preachers aren't going to tell you pain is a commodity. Pain is 100% a commodity. You can steward it. Your kids are a commodity. Your time's a commodity. Your money's a commodity. Oil's a commodity. It has a value. So pain, you can waste it, and you can just be miserable, and you can do that. Or you can steward your pain as a commodity to the glory of God. You can steward your entire life, but you will not do that naturally.
What does the word steward mean? What are you saying?
To manage.
Okay.
Yeah, and steward, I think of steward as you manage something that you know is not yours.
Okay.
So you're stewarding it. You're almost a fiduciary for someone else. And so when I say, like, I look at everything in my life as I steward it for God's glory. And that's, again, maybe that's where I'm weird. I don't have an area of my life that I don't think of in a spiritual lens.
And let's go to that, because one of the hardest things to do for men is to, I'm going to quote here scripture, be still and know that I am God. Mm-hmm. And that be still thing is really hard for a man who thinks that he's responsible for everything. Mm-hmm. Responsible for the finances in his family, responsible for being able to hold his marriage together, responsible for his children's happiness, providing the roof over the head and the groceries, but also providing that guidance, whatever that means, whether it's spiritual or strategic, to be still and just be in God's presence and receive him. That's hard for men to do because we want to be that go-getter, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we're taught to do. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for me, it's helping to know that I will often go in the wrong directions unless I've been with the Lord first. So the be still, I even in the be still, I still look at it as a decided action. Like, I'm going to choose to be still, but I'm going to choose to be with the Lord. Right. Because I'm going to screw it up on my own. And that's where I think a lot of people realize, guy or gal, you're going to make a mess of it on your own. And you maybe already have. That's why I always laugh when people are like, oh, I can't go back into the church. I've made such a mess of my life. It's like, that's the perfect time. It's like, it's a group of sinners. The church is messy. Like, come on in. It's an ER for the hurting. But like, it's that idea of like just being with the Lord and starting to see your whole life through it. Let me ask you this, because this is what's hard for me. I worked a secular job for a couple of years, and obviously all as a kid, but I've been in ministry, full-time ministry, since I was 23. So since 2010, so 12 years now. I don't know what it's like to be you. You don't know what it's like to be me. My job is to work for Jesus. And so I think about Jesus constantly. I'm thinking about the scriptures constantly. I'm constantly preparing for a Bible study. I'm in the Word. I'm literally paid to read the Bible, essentially. Is it hard to like, you go to Crown and have a grid for like Jesus and like think through your faith and how it works in the marketplace and in the workplace? Is that difficult to do?
I love that question, and it used to be. And it wasn't with Crown, but in a previous employer in Lifetime. But because it wasn't because of the employer, it was because of me. And I kept trying to go in, and I wanted to separate my life into buckets. You know, here's my spiritual life over here. Mm-hmm. Here's my career path over here.
And they're waffles. They're not going to touch. Everything's
neat.
Yeah.
Then
I do the Jesus thing on Sunday.
I don't want the peas to touch the potatoes, because even though they all end up in the same place, it just doesn't look good on my plate, right? So I wanted to keep them all separate, and I thought that was the strategic way to do it, because you go in and you practice this leadership and you present yourself in a certain way in a corporate world or maybe somewhere else, doesn't matter. But what I came to realize, where I know I matured as a Christian, was in any setting, the community, the environment is really all about relationships. And I get what I want, you get what you want, and how do we work together in an environment to be cohesive? But I was able to think about that in a way that I kind of invited Christ to that relationship too. We're supposed to invite him to our marriage, right? Our relationship and our marriage. Why wouldn't it also make sense to invite him into the workplace?
Did you notice anything change when you kind of made that pivot? Like, what were some changes that you noticed maybe in yourself or in your career?
They were with me. It was the way that I handled or managed people and responded. So when, as often happens, something goes a little bit sideways during the day and it's unexpected, it's not on your itinerary, it's not on your Microsoft calendar to go south. And I just kind of thought that, my response to this is going to set the tone for what's next. And even though I'm maybe the subordinate in the situation, how I handle it might influence others around me. And how powerful can that be if I know I have that power? And if I can control it, thinking, what would Jesus do? How would he handle this? How would he respond so that everybody wins? Became my mantra. And so that's what I tried to apply. And it's interesting, Craig, because I think so many people in the workplace, they want to bring Jesus and they want to bring their faith into their careers, but they're scared to do so because for so long, it really hasn't been widely accepted. As a matter of fact, we try to avoid that because we're driven by social media, politics, and we try to stay away from that conversation because you don't know if you're going to end up in the HR office.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real thing.
Yeah, it sure is. And so you just try to demonstrate by example. And in doing that, I have found more people coming to me and sharing their faith journey with me and sharing songs. I get songs on from YouTube songs. Hey man, this is my vibe today. And they're spiritual songs. And it's so rewarding and refreshing that they see me and recognize that in me and that they're comfortable enough to share their own feelings and kind of what their faith journey is for that day. And so that has really tightened the bond for a lot of my relationships at work. And as a result, we all become wildly successful together. That's the key.
Yeah, because you're not worried about your success. You're worried about the unit's success.
I want to see everybody succeed. And when you focus on someone else's success, they in turn are going to focus on yours. You start pulling for one another. When you win, I win.
My friend Scott Estep was a pastor, and he went into real estate. And real estate is notoriously cutthroat because you work on commission.
Right.
So you don't share leads. You don't share, this kind of thing. Like, it's just cutthroat. You don't do that. And Scott went in and was like, yeah, I'm just going to do it different. And he started sharing leads. He just started walking in a place of like, God is my provider. He's going to provide. And if I can help some other people along the way, great. And if to live my life open might get me burned, someone might take advantage of that. But I'd rather do that and live open towards Christ. And so he's just changing this real estate office. Like it doesn't make sense. Like, what is he doing? So, but it also is really attractive because people don't actually like living cutthroat.
Right.
And people don't like living with the scarcity mindset of like, there's not enough and we're all gonna, go belly up. So he asks his manager, can I do a Bible study in the mornings, once a week? And they're like, yeah, as long as you do it before work, well, you can use the conference room. And he just starts this in his workplace. 30 minutes before work, I'm just going to do a Bible study. And because of the way he had already treated his colleagues, people just start coming to this thing. And he just completely changed the culture. And then because of that, they became like the top producing real estate agent in the community. And he became like one of the number one realtors in the county because of the fact that like it just works that way. Like he just started living his life open, and he helped launch a bunch of other people's careers and help them out. And then guess what? When they have a lead they can't handle, who do you think they called?
Right. And you don't have to go out and tell everybody you're a Christian. You can demonstrate Christianity and demonstrate your faith, and people will know. And people tend to come to you and they will ask you many times, like, dude, what is it about you? Mm-hmm. There's your opening. There's your opportunity to talk. Craig, as we kind of wind things up here shortly, let me ask you this question. There are a lot of men, especially, and a lot of ladies maybe they're listening too, that they're on the cusp of that faith journey. If they come to church, they're going to sit in the back pew, but they're just still kind of kicking the tires. What are some real simple things, some simple steps that you would encourage that person on that line in the sand or on the fence to take, that could be really easy steps, or just one step in particular to just begin to pursue that, or open up that Bible, or take that first step?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's if they're not in the faith, it's figuring out whether they believe it. But most of the time, I think let's approach it from this way. Maybe they believe in God, but they're just not serious. They don't really know what to do. Basically, maybe the question is, how do they get spiritually healthy?
What's the action step?
Yeah. There's two things, and it is the diet and exercise of spirituality. Everyone will say, how do you stay in shape? Well, what's the answer? It's diet and
exercise. Yeah.
Everyone hates it. We want a quick pill. Is there a pill I can take? Is there a thing I can do?
Can I watch a movie?
Yeah. It's diet and exercise. The diet and exercise of spirituality are time in the scriptures and prayer. If you want to be healthy, you will be someone who is saturated in the Word of God, reads the Bible or listens to it. We have wonderful apps. You can listen to it, and that you spend time in prayer. And why? So a lot of Christians, they hear, read your Bible. Why? For the simple fact of, if this is the Word of God, let's just take the New Testament. Do you know how Jesus actually lived his life? Do you know how he treated people? So if someone was right on the edge, and this is the advice I actually give them, it's the same thing I did. Go read the Gospels. Go read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're the first four books of the New Testament, and they're specifically about the words in the life of Jesus Christ. And read them. And it would take them, it's maybe 60, 70 pages, all of them, probably 120 chapters or so. And a chapter can be just a certain amount of verses. It doesn't have to be long. Mm-hmm. Go read that. Well, then what do I do? Read it again.
Oh.
Start over. Go back into Matthew, Mark.
So you're not done.
Nope.
It's a continuous journey.
And then what do I do? Read them again. I would tell someone to read the gospel accounts 3 or 4 times if they were just starting out, especially if they never have. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John over and over and over and over, and acquaint yourself with who Jesus is. You say you follow him. Do you know his words? Do you know how he taught? Do you understand it? So then maybe if you want to go a little deeper, maybe you get something like a study Bible that has some notes in it that helps you. It's like, man, Jesus is talking about lampstands and virgins, and I don't understand any of it. And he's talking about, how does one be born again? And what is, the camel through an eye of a needle? And he's talking about birds being fed and sparrows in the field. And
you're thinking, this guy's crazy.
Yeah, I don't understand any of this. Well, but hey, there's this Bible, and it's got these little notes at the bottom that help me understand it. And then in prayer, just beginning a conversation with Jesus. Just talking with the Lord.
And that's an important message, because people will say, yeah, I really don't know how to pray. But it's a conversation.
So
right?
My prayer, people would probably think I was either crazy or like, oh man, I didn't know you could pray like that, because my prayer is often like, God, I need you to do something about that. Or like, Lord, it's just an ongoing, like and I don't think it's irreverent. There's people like, you most holy and precious Father of all. And I'm just like, just stop it. There's nothing wrong. Like, God deserves our reverence. And there are times I come to the Lord deeply humbled in reverent prayer because of my action has been not appropriate for a man of God. But when I am just in the day, when I'm sermon writing, Lord, what do you want me to say there? How do you want me to say that? Like, what does Steve need to hear this week? Like, how am I? We're talking about persecution this coming Sunday. Woohoo topic, right? How do I make Steve, who sits in my church and will be staring at me for 30 minutes with his hands folded, how do I make Steve, who hasn't really experienced much persecution in his life, understand persecution, get prepared for persecution, and also have an understanding of persecution of churches around the world? I can give a PowerPoint. That's not very encouraging. So it's stirring. So I need the Lord, like, show me that, Lord. And I'm typing and I'm like, is that good? Do we like that? How do you want me to say that? Where's that, Lord? Give me that other scripture. What's that you want that I can connect? Oh, right. That's good. And people would probably think I'm crazy, and maybe I am, but it's an ongoing conversation with my kids or with we pray every night with my kids. And it's like, Lord, thank you for this day. We're grateful that we had another good day as a family. Thank you for the food we had. Would you just bless us with good sleep, that we could just wake up energized for the morning? And then we've got this coming up. Hey, Lord, my daughter's anxious about this. Do this kind of thing. But if you grew up in a very religious home, or you grew up Catholic, and it's like prayers had to be routine, and they, bless us, O Lord, for these gifts that we're about to receive from thy bountiful hand, this kind of thing, to just say, Lord, thank you so much for this food. We're so grateful for it. We know we don't provide. I don't give the sun and the rain. You do. So without it, I don't eat. And I'm just grateful for it, because without that, I die. So thank you, Lord. Feels like, oh, you can do that?
Yeah.
That's where spiritual health really comes in. So if people want to get spiritually healthy, they have to be in the Word. They have to be in prayer. And then one of the things I think is a wild card, maybe it's just for me, I think we live in a golden age of music, and I really connect with the Lord through worship music.
I'm the same.
And so I don't care if you like the old time hymns.
Right.
I don't care if you like the new stuff. We're in an age where a lot of churches have started writing worship music again, and it's beautiful stuff. And they've come out with longer songs, because it's not for Christian radio, so it has to be 3.5 seconds, 3 minutes and 35 seconds of upbeat and K-love positive. I don't really love Christian radio, but I love gospel music.
Right.
And because I was listening to a song the other day. It's by a group called Maverick City and Elevation Worship. It's called Talking to Jesus. And it's like 9 minutes long. And it's this dude telling a story about how he was raised to pray. And then he saw prayer in his grandma. Then his mom taught him to pray. And then he started to pray. And now he's teaching his kids to pray, to talk to Jesus. It's not great for Christian radio, but it just stirs my affections towards the Lord. So I'm exercising. I'm just listening to this music. There's this song, Lion of Judah by Elevation Worship. Dude, it just bangs. Like, drums are good, and it's like, hail, hail, Lion of Judah, let the lion roar. It's the chorus. It gets me jacked up. So I'm listening to that, riding my bike. So that's another thing people can really engage in. I think God made us to like music, and music helps us emote in a certain way. Which, by the way, before I was emotionally healthy, I just stood there like a stone during church while the singing was happening, because I'm like, I'm a man, I don't sing. And now I don't care. I'm a terrible singer. I just love song, and I just want to lift my voice to the Lord. And so I think those are the things where people can really kind of engage in that, especially if you're at work and you don't have to, I can't be reading. I can't be listening to some music. Just draw your heart nearer to God. Just have your thoughts on him in some way.
There's another element to that. We've been talking about, people on the fence and those that are already recognize that they know that God exists and that Jesus exists, and encouraging them to dive deeper. There's also those that are out there, Pastor, that they're angry at God and they don't know what to do with that. And that we go back to the emotional health, right? And this is where the emotional connects to the spiritual. It's been my mindset, because I have such a deep friendship with Christ, with the Lord, that just like with my spouse, I feel like I have that freedom to be angry with him when I'm angry, when I feel that. And much like your spouse, they know when you're hiding something, or you're trying to hide it. They know that you're angry. If our spouses know that, God certainly knows it. He knows you're angry with him. And for those that are out there and struggling with that anger, can we tell them that it's okay to be angry with God, but keep that conversation going to work that conflict out?
Yeah.
How do you advise that?
I tell people all the time, I'm like, you're mad at God? Tell him.
Yeah.
You want to swear? Swear. He knows your heart.
Right.
So like your words aren't going to shock him.
Right.
And again, there's this, some of the old time reverend pastors like, you need to, he knows my heart. Right. And it's, by the way, sinful, and he still saved me. So it doesn't get, there's no degrees of sin of like, oh, I'm more sinny today and God is more disappointed. It's like, tell him this is going to be you'll love this. I wrote a book, Steve. I'm an author. Did you know that? Self-published, big deal on the Amazons.
Free.
Yeah, it's free. But it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, my franchise. But actually, I wrote on this. So I did a book on Psalm 23 and talk about the valley of the shadow of death. You know, that the famous Coolio line. Coolio didn't write that, even though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Mm-hmm. So I write in the book about when you're really angry at God because you're in a dark season. Mm-hmm. And I talk all about that and how some people are tempted to sit down and give God the silent treatment. And some people are just exhausted. And some people are really mad. And I talk about kind of walking back from that. So just in the interest of time, if someone's interested, there's literally a free audiobook on Spotify where maybe they're listening to this podcast. They can type in, "Who is your shepherd?" a pastoral look at Psalm 23, and my audiobook will be on there. And they can even jump ahead to In the Valley, I think is the title of the chapter. It's the In the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And they can hear a little bit about that, because I really think we've got it wrong when we're like, well, I have to be perfectly happy all the time. I'm so blessed. I have friends and it drives me nuts. And I actually said this to one of them. I asked him, how are you doing? And they give the Dave Ramsey line back, better than I deserve, every time. And it drives me nuts.
Because it's not honest. It's not authentic.
It's why do I ask?
Right.
And so I actually said to one of them one time, I'm like, I'm not going to ask you anymore how you're doing. Because when I ask, I'm actually asking. You can say, not very good. Right. I could use some prayer. I understand you're doing better than you deserve. I understand you deserve hell. I understand that from a theological standpoint. I learned Greek and Hebrew. I read the Bible. I'm like Jesus all-star guy over here. I get the nuts and bolts of you deserve hell because you are a wretched sinner. I'm asking you, how are you? And I think people think about God that way. Right. That God, it's like, well, I'm better than I deserve. I deserve hell, Lord. So I can't tell you that I'm actually really struggling and I'm really mad that you didn't heal my dad.
Right.
And I don't understand why you would do that. And I don't want to follow you because you didn't do what I asked you to do. And instead, I'll just put on the Christian smile and say, well, I'm better than I deserve and I'm blessed and you're actually pissed. Yeah. So just be honest with that and walk in that. And I actually find the people that actually are honest and walk in it, they come out of it. The people that pretend they're not, they just stay in it.
We've all exploded at our spouses. Our spouses have exploded at us. We've exploded at our kids, and regretfully, but we have that because it's human emotion. Yep. God gave us that human emotion, and
he's big enough; he can handle it.
He's got pretty broad shoulders. There's been times that I have thrown my hands up in the air, and it's, God, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. What am I supposed to learn from this? This is just stop the madness already because I've had enough. When does it stop? Mm-hmm. And those are just brutal conversations that I rant and I can take a deep breath and I just try to listen. But you want that, and you want that authentic relationship where you can expose your anger.
Oh yeah, I've had conversations with God. I'm like, if you want me to stay in ministry, you'll fix this. Like I threaten him. Like he needs me in ministry. Like he's like, oh no, I'm gonna lose my top salesman. But I'm like, hey, if you want Craig on your team, you better get to getting, sir. And it's just like, I'd rather still tell him that, because I think it's like when your kid's like, I'm gonna run away, and we're like, oh yeah, you gonna? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. I always compare my relationship with God of like, did your dad ever let you mow the lawn next to him? Or like you see these things where like you let your kid mow the lawn with their little fake lawnmower.
I have a picture of my son next to me.
And they think, I'm mowing this lawn. I'm crushing it right now. And as a dad, you're like, you're doing great.
Yes.
You're mowing the lawn. Oh my gosh, look how good you're doing. They're not doing a thing.
Right.
But
they're kind of in your way.
They're kind of in your way. You do a better job and you don't need them. But you love having them there. And you love having them think they're a part of it. I think that's how God is with me most times. He wants to be with me. He wants to mow the lawn with me because he's a good father and he wants that. And so when I'm like, look, I'm doing it. He's like, you are doing it. And I'm like, man. And the trick is remembering that I'm not.
Right.
But I think God as a father, like if we can have those relationships with our kids,
right.
I think God in the same way is like, yeah, you are doing it. And I'm proud of you and well done. But you will only have those highs if you're honest in the lows, if you're honest in the mids. And I'll have you close us. I'll say this and then I'll pitch it to you to close us because we've gone a little long. Follow God in the boring, in the day-to-day. And that's where I see a lot of the church struggle. People don't show up to church for months and it's like, oh, we had ball tournaments and it's just been crazy, but we're good. We're doing okay. And, life's just been busy and all that stuff. I've walked with so many people, Steve, and I'm just like, man, life is going to smack them so hard really quickly. Mm-hmm. Cancer's coming. Mom's going to die. The adult, something, the loss of job. And they are going to have no foundation because they were like, it's smooth sailing. Why do I need to do this? Put gas in the tank when they're smooth sailing. Be in the word when they're smooth sailing. And when you do that, if I told you, Steve, in 6 months, you've got to run a marathon, you would start training tomorrow.
Yes.
But if I just came to you the day before the marathon, I was like, hey, you got to run a marathon tomorrow. I don't care how fit you are. It would be a nightmare.
I would have a hard time finishing.
You need to train now because there is a marathon coming. And so that's my best spiritual health advice as a pastor. You might think, Craig, we're actually doing pretty good. Like, if you want to be spiritually healthy, thank God for the pretty good. Pray that it stays pretty good. I hope that cancer doesn't come. But I'm telling you it does. I've seen it. It does. It comes for everyone. It doesn't matter your last name. Sickness, money troubles, health troubles, family troubles, death, the car accident. It will come. Will you have the stamina to run the race spiritually then? And if you're not training for it now, you won't.
You're absolutely right. And I think that to piggyback on what you just said, you need to find the joy in the mundane.
Yeah.
Because you're not always going to experience those highs and you have to seek them out yourself. I'll give you a quick for instance and I'll wrap it up. It's hard to do the dishes and standing there while your family is celebrating and watching the football game in the living room, laughing and joking it up. But when you do those dishes, you celebrate the fact that you just had all of your family members around the table for the first time in maybe a month. And you were all together and you thank God for those dishes. You thank God when those kids leave that you have to wash bed sheets in rooms that don't get used, but every other month because your kids came to spend the night and wanted to spend it with you and the joy and the memories that you created as a result. It's the $100 you spent on the restaurant, but there you were with your family gathered around the table once again. Finding the joy in the mundane is hard to do, but it's there and you can find it. So I really encourage people to look for that because there's celebration in those
God
things.
in it. seeing God in it, seeing the blessing in it.
It sure is. Well, hey, Craig, it's been a real joy and a real pleasure celebrating and talking to you about what we've now concluded as our three-legged stool. We talked about the physical health, we talked about the emotional health, and today talking about the spiritual health. And all of those three things go together, and probably the spiritual health is the most important. But if we don't have all three legs, we're going to struggle.
Yep.
And that stool is going to fall.
Yep. And all of us have an area we need to grow in.
We sure.
And no one's perfect in all of them. And so we just need to, it was why we kind of started. And some people might go, well, they didn't fix it for me. No one's perfect in this.
Right.
It's a conversation, and that's what we had, because that's what it is. It's just a journey. It's a conversation. It's, hey, I want to go from A to B and eventually B to C and C to D. And I want to die, look back and say, I'm not the person I was.
Right.
I'm growing. I'm physically healthier. I'm emotionally healthier. I'm spiritually healthier. And then if something comes and fights one of those areas, I'm gonna respond. So.
That's right. Well, hey, that wraps things up for our third leg of the journey, our spiritual health.
We'll be back, though. We don't know with what.
We sure will. We'll be back, and we'll let you know. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you get to watch the previous two as well. This has been Exceptionally Average.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys. We'll be back.